Today on the first ever New to Sumo podcast community mailbag, why are there so few Ozeki? Is Kotozakura a future Yokozuna? And what is the future of this catchy jingle?
Let's start the show. New to Sumo, here we go.
We want to start by thanking everyone who has made this channel possible. A year ago, we thought we might only be getting an audience of about 100 people, but here we are a full year later. We've reached 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, and as our reward to you for giving us so much support, we are going to be answering all of your questions on this special episode of our podcast.
Yeah, so thanks everybody so much for sending in questions in the YouTube comments, a couple via email. We're happy to answer anything we can. And I guess let's get right into it with the first one.
All right. Our first community mailbag question comes from Maxwell. Why have there been so few Ozeki recently? I'm new to Sumo, but looking at 2016-2017, there were regular 3 to 4 Ozeki, even with 3 to 4 Yokozuna, whereas now we have 2, with no one else looking particularly close. I would have thought that with Hakuho or Terunofuji retiring, it would be easier for wrestlers behind them to get to Ozeki, but that doesn't look like it's happening. I mean, I can give you a simple answer right now. It's that they're all hurt or they've all gotten old. You look at Kirishima or you look at Asanoyama. Those are two guys that were in Ozeki position that had just terrible luck. Then you go to Takayasu and Mitakeumi, two guys who were Ozeki that got old. Same with Shodai. We have plenty of Ozeki on this Banzuke, but they've all just had really bad luck or really bad injuries, or they've just gotten really old.
Yeah, I think I would, as opposed to using the specific cases, I'd probably just look at it and say, when there's parity to the level that we've been seeing in sumo in the last year or two, you're just naturally it's going to be harder for people to satisfy those rigid requirements to become an Ozeki. I mean, to get 33 wins over 3 tournaments in the Komusubi Sekiwake ranks, I should say. In order to do that, you have to be much better than the rest of the competition around you. And I think what we're seeing is there's just a lot of parity among that top area of the Banzuke. There aren't, other than I would say Onosato, Kotozakura, and obviously Hoshoryu until very recently. Those guys were pretty much the only ones who were so far and away better than their competitors. Now, if I'm looking at the Banzuke, I see some guys who I could see being an Ozeki at some point. You could totally see that happening for Wakataka Kage, Wakamoto Haru, some of the other guys, maybe even Oho, Abi, maybe if he gets a couple tournaments together at that level. Then obviously Kirishima's done it before. Daieisho is perpetually on an Ozeki run, but averaging 11 wins in a tournament isn't usually his cup of tea. So, I just think it comes down to the parity that when you don't have guys that are so far above the rest, when you don't have such a giant disparity between the guys at the top and the guys at the bottom, you're not going to have as many Ozeki because of the way the promotion works.
Yeah, and just to add one more thing to that, it is a little bit rare to see a guy fall from the rank of Ozeki and come back to it. Terunofuji is obviously the ultra rare exception to that rule. But, the fact that he's done it does show that it is possible. So, for all we know, someone like Takayasu or Kirishima does have one more shot at Ozeki left in them. Now, whether they have any Yokozuna potential left in them, that's a whole different can of worms and beyond the scope of this particular question.
Yeah, but I'd say it's hard to do it once. It's extremely hard to do it once. It's definitely going to be even harder to do it twice for anyone who's a former Ozeki looking to come back.
All right, our next question comes from the Buckeye Gamer. Oh, congratulations on your national football title. I feel like I'm on an island. I just have never seen Kotozakura as a future Yokozuna. His mobility and body just feel like a Takakeisho type career, especially with his current struggles and getting closer to 30. It's also felt like Hoshoryu's grandfather's shadow has weighed heavily. Oh, his grandfather's shadow has weighed heavily on him. I hope I'm wrong, but I'd love to know your thoughts on, is Kotozakura an actual Yokozuna, or another future ex Ozeki? Do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is, I think it's a perfectly fair attempt to say that the legacy of his grandfather weighs on him and that in some way impedes his performance. But at the end of the day, whenever we make these kinds of guesses as to what's going through an athlete's mind, their psychology and how that's how that's affecting their performances, we're completely guessing, obviously. We don't know what's going through his head. We don't know if there's any correlation between his grandfather's career and his own, and if that's affecting him. It's an interesting theory, but not one that will never get confirmed one way or another. One thing we will get confirmed eventually is whether or not he becomes a Yokozuna, and I think we've seen on enough occasions that Kotozakura is capable of having great tournament performances. At the end of the day, to become a Yokozuna, all you got to do is be an Ozeki and win two straight tournaments. Kotozakura is a current Ozeki. He has won a recent tournament. I don't see why it's out of the realms of possibility for him to do it twice in a row. He's the kind of wrestler who can put up Yusho level performances almost every tournament when he's in good shape. So, I mean, is it more likely than not? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would give it over 50% chance of him becoming a Yokozuna, but I think it's definitely a realistic possibility. I mean, maybe 30% chance. Does that seem fair? I think, yeah, he's absolutely got what it takes. He's just got to stay healthy and stay consistent.
Yeah, I agree with you on a lot of on a lot of what you said, and to further emphasize the point that I think he's got the potential. You know, at the start of the year, there were only two men on the entire Bansuke who were able to win 14 matches in 15 days. One of them was Terunofuji, and the other was Kotozakura. With Terunofuji now retired, Kotozakura is the only one on the Bansuke who has proven that he can go 14-1 in the Makuuchi division. And the fact that he did that from the Ozeki position, it just further shows that yes, he does have the potential. If he can do it once, as long as he's not injured, he can do it again. And I understand the concern that he's getting closer to 30, but he's not even as old as Kirishima was when Kirishima was poised to become a Yokozuna. He's not even as old as Taka Keisho was when Taka Keisho retired last year. He's a lot taller than Taka Keisho, so I don't know if the comparison to his mobility and body is really all that fair. Kotozakura has he's proven he has all the physical tools because he went 14-1. So I think, just let the guy do his type of sumo. Hoshoryu is still injured, so he won't have to deal with him next Basho most likely. So it's just going to come down to, can Kotozakura beat Onosato and some of the other guys if he wants to really assert himself as, his grandfather's grandson.
Yeah, and assuming that the reason for his last two tournaments being so poor was injury, if he's
Mhm.
back healthy, he's usually the type of wrestler who gets double-digit wins. If you look back at his history in the um in the top ranks, so I wouldn't be too worried that he's now suddenly an 8-win wrestler.
All right, next question from not many user names left. Why were there people wearing brown vests throughout this basho? Not sure, but that might be a good question if you, for those of you in the comments, please let us know who the people wearing the brown vests during the basho were. And yeah, you will educate us just as much as we're trying to educate you.
Yeah, we said we'd answer the questions. We didn't always say we'd know what the answers were, but our answer is I don't know.
Yep. All right. Next question, What's in a Namish asks, I would like to know how all of the team had their first taste of sumo and how they got hooked into the sport since it's quite a rare subject in the West.
Well, I think that you got me into the sport, to be honest, so I guess you take it away.
Yeah, so I was watching an episode of a podcast a couple of years ago that had like a whole 30-minute to 1 hour segment on what sumo wrestling is. I was just like kind of, watching it, listening to it absentmindedly, didn't think much of it. But sometime later, the old YouTube algorithm decided to recommend that video from Insider that many of you might have seen on a sumo wrestler breaking down sumo scenes in movies. And that I remember distinctly the little caption or the little thumbnail being that famous scene of Fat B Word from Austin Powers and Goldmember as a sumo wrestler. I watched the video, I found it fascinating, and within a few months, I started, following it really closely. And, then I started watching some of the sumo highlights on YouTube. From there, I decided to find ways to watch it live. And, I've only been following this for, 1 year and 9 months now. So I'm very sorry, not even 1 year. Yeah, 1 year, 9 months. So I'm, about as new, maybe even newer to this amazing sport as some of you are. And about a month after I started watching it, I introduced it to you, and you've been hating me for it ever since.
The rest is history. No, it's been great. It's been a really great addition to my life. And, I know this isn't really part of the question, but I think important to the premise of it is what's so appealing about sumo to us. And I think it has something really special that both of us who are fans of other American sports, I'm a big baseball fan. I know you're a big football fan.
Mhm.
It has something that those sports don't have, as great as those other sports are, which is this extremely long tradition, extremely long. Some of these, baseball is obviously old, but it doesn't even compare to how old sumo is. And the emphasis on maintaining those traditions, sometimes for better or for worse, is really special. For an example, one of the kinds of traditions that I just love that hardly even gets talked about is the fact that at the center of the dohyo, they place like certain special items inside to, bring good luck and good spirits to the ring. For example, like dried fish and flowers and things like that. Just the fact that something like that is done, it's not even, there's no ceremony made of it publicly, at least like during the tournaments. It's just something that's done because it's this special effort. I think is really really fascinating and nice, and it's very different than what we experience in a lot of American sports. So, and I'm really glad to have it as part of my life these days.
All right. Now, our next question comes from Habagob. Who are your favorite non-sequitori Rikishi you follow? Oh, I love this question. My favorite is the Great Satan. That is to say, Satono Fuji, the 47-year-old boat twirler from Isagahama Heya. Gosh, he has so few winning records, and yet it's so fascinating to see a guy who is that old, looking like a human turtle almost sometimes, just to see him go into the ring and just be able to, slap some kids that are like less than half his age around sometimes. It's very funny to be sure. And my other favorite is probably Dua Nojo, the biggest guy in the entire Bonsuke right now. Just to see a guy that massive, just to see him like moving around someone that big in the ring, and just whether he's winning or losing, it's always fascinating to see how someone that big reacts to something like that.
It's a very interesting case study also of why bigger isn't always better in
Mm.
sumo. You'd probably assume, as a casual, as someone who's never really watched sumo actually, that to be the biggest is simply to be the best. But Dua Nojo, he's a good example of that, like how it can be very successful for you to just have incredible weight, but then also how it's possible to beat someone who is quadruple your weight sometimes in sumo, and we see that all the time. And then I guess my pick would be Daihisho. I'm probably pronouncing the name wrong. That's not Daieisho from the Sekiwake rank. That's Daihisho. He's in the Makushita division, and this one's a little bit unusual, but it's because when I watch the earlier divisions, one thing that always catches my eye is Daihisho's unusually long leg raise when he's getting ready for the Tachi Eye. The wrestlers lift up both of their legs, and he keeps his up in the air for a solid 5 to 10 seconds before putting his leg down. It's just something that whatever I'm doing in the room, if I'm distracted and I have Sumo on in the background in the early divisions, I always notice him doing this move. And I find it very entertaining. I'm sure there's a reason beyond just doing it for the memes, and I'd love to know more about that, but I haven't seen much coverage about it. So it's just kind of a fascinating thing I've noticed. It used to be Waka Ikari, and then of course he got promoted, like many of the greats do. So he's no longer a pick I can make for the non-sekitori wrestlers.
All right. We have a few questions from Zardsire. Let's just go with them in order. Have some questions about your favorite Rikishi. What are your favorite Rikishi to root for overall? Why don't you take that one to start?
My gosh. Okay, so since his debut in the Makuuchi division, I have loved watching Onosato.
Hmm.
I just love I don't know, his attitude. He just seems very laid back, like in the ring before and after matches. He doesn't seem to like need to put on a mean face. He doesn't seem to be um, overly celebratory or overly reserved after matches, which sometimes wrestlers have. And I like seeing him in pictures outside of matches. That's just like one of the funniest things to me. I've talked about it in other shows. I think Takeru Fuji is really entertaining to watch as well, but. Honestly, the most entertaining Rikishi to me, it's a no contest. It has to be Ura.
Hmm.
Ura is absolute cinema to watch. In almost every match he competes in, he is doing impossible things with his body, launching himself seemingly just for the heck of it across the dohyo. It is hilarious. It is incredible sometimes how he gets his wins. But he'll be completely horizontal and somehow still flip someone over and manage to get a win in a match. He's just incredible, and he is a great personality as well outside of the ring. So yeah, I think there can only be Uda as far as favorite to watch, but maybe not the one I root for the most intensely and most seriously because he's obviously not usually in the hunt for the U show.
Yeah, I mean, Ura is on my list as well. Just like you, he is, probably the most entertaining sumo wrestler, win or lose. He's always going to do a little bit extra for the crowd, i.e., me. But aside from him, I really like Kirishima. I just find his style of being able to do absolutely everything to be just very entertaining. He can beat you with pure strength. He can beat you with wrestling. He can beat you with speed. You literally never know what you're going to get from him, win or lose. But when he does win, it's usually with something pretty special. Aside from him, I'd also probably put Takeru Fuji on that list. He's a guy that's so interesting with his like extremely thin ankles and his just massive torso. Very fun to watch. Another guy I've come to love is Onishiki. Our Ukrainian brother. He's very fascinating to watch. So proud of him getting a Fighting Spirit prize in his debut. And yeah, those are my favorites. So our next question in that section is whose style of sumo is your favorite to watch? For me, I've always been fond of the guys who have the power to grab you by the mawashi, lift you up, and set you down outside. Teruno Fuji was able to do that, and it's one of the reasons that I loved him. I got into the sport a little bit too late to see the great Ozeki Tochinoshin do that, but he was very capable of doing that as well. And yeah, it's just if you're able to physically just lift out your opponent and you just get them, struggling to shake their legs off, that's one of my favorite things to see.
Yeah, I personally love throwers. I mean, I love how I think it's a very risky style, which is why with Hoshoryu we've seen a lot of you know, high wins, high loss tournaments over the last couple years where he will get a lot of very impressive wins where he looks like he's on top of the world, and then in the next match the next day, he'll just be totally shocking us with a loss. And that's because, when you're attempting to throw people so much, you leave yourself very vulnerable using that style versus if you're just pushing and kind of punching, you have more of an established base. So I think that, the Hoshoryu and others like him style of throwing people around, grabbing the mawashi, trying to flip people over, the grappling, all of that, heavily influenced by judo, I believe. I find that to be some of the most entertaining to watch, especially as a neutral, I would say. If you're looking for a match that's going to be really high intensity, it's probably the closest thing to like watching a UFC match or something like that. So I really do enjoy seeing Hoshoryu wrestle, even if he's not necessarily the person I root for the most.
And the final part of that question, who are your favorites off the dohyo? I'm going to assume that you're referring to like Rikishi content creators on YouTube, like the what was it?
Utaguyama.
Futagoyama stable or like Isagahama stable or Arashio stable. Yeah, go lead us off.
Well, I don't watch many of those channels myself, unfortunately. I just don't find myself having the time to. But as far as, wrestlers in the top division and the content I've seen outside of their sumo, I think Hoshoryu and Uda, both of whom I was just talking about, the two of them just seem hilarious. They're obviously in the same stable. They're buddies. Probably, I'm guessing some of Uda's craziness rubs off on Hoshoryu. But both of them just seem like really fun personalities outside of the ring. It's one of those things where we had a comment in a different video where someone made the point that Hoshoryu seemed like he took himself very seriously. But actually, if you investigate some of the stuff going on outside the ring, he seems like a really just jolly, silly guy, honestly. And it's been fun to see a lot of the stuff on social media, him and his dancing, his like ridiculous pictures he's taking with the guys in his stable. I really love that kind of thing. Although, since I don't watch those channels, I'm not exposed to quite as much of it as I'd probably like to.
And for me, it's probably Atami Fuji. He's always seems to, even if he's upset, he always seems to be smiling in whatever he's in. I think he's got like a little bit of a lisp or whatever it is. He's just so adorable to hear talk. And yeah, whenever he is doing like any sort of interview or any sort of content for the Isagahama Bea YouTube channel, I'm there. I'm always watching and waiting to see. And I think my he only recently retired, but I believe it was either Taiga or Tanji of Arashio Bea. Those guys really got me pumped because one of those two guys managed to swat away Micah Parsons, the great Dallas Cowboys linebacker. And like those guys were just so entertaining with it that I was just so proud of them. I kind of wish that they hadn't retired at the end of the last Basho. This question comes to us from an email. What is the problem with the henka?
So it's
Ah,
interesting because when we first started getting really serious into sumo, it was maybe the one of our first tournaments that we were watching closely when Takakeisho won the tournament on a henka in a playoff on an 11-4 record against Atami Fuji, who we were just talking about. So that was our first real serious foray into the implications of a henka in this kind of situation. Without that context, it would have seemed like something that's so mundane. But when you're winning a tournament on a henka and all the excitement is building up to this final clash between the two guys that are fighting for the Yusho, and it's over as quickly as it begins like that, where someone just jumps out of the way and there's no contact, I could kind of understand it. It feels like something that, even though it's not against the rules, I'm honestly surprised that it isn't. Why there wouldn't be some kind of requirement that you need to make contact with the. I guess there is some degree of contact, and it's hard to legislate for more in that kind of situation. Maybe because sumo was made to be so simple, it's impossible to make that against the rules. But I understand why people dislike it because to me, it's. If it's not an unfair advantage, it's just simply an effort to not compete, you could almost say. But what do you think?
I've got a lot to say about the henka. On one hand, I do forgive Takakeisho for using the henka to win, because, as someone in his position, he does need to do whatever is possible to win a championship. That said, here is why the henka is bad. The henka is bad for the same reason that everybody who watched the famous Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao fight hated that boxing match. It is for the same reason everyone hated Floyd Mayweather versus Conor McGregor. It's for the same reason everyone hated Mike Tyson versus Jake Paul a few months ago. It is because when you are not hitting each other, it makes a boring fight. This is a combat sport. If you are not making contact with each other and you are deliberately dodging, then you are lessening the enjoyment of the sport. That said, there are scenarios where it can be very fun to see. If you have a guy like Enho, who is about 5'5", and you see him going up against someone who is, 6'3", who is a full like head and shoulders above them. If you see him henka that guy and you see that big guy, go down and you see like a David beating Goliath type situation, that's interesting. Seeing David beat Goliath, however he does it, will never not be interesting, even if it is, a non-contact situation where like a small guy beats a big guy. But when you've got two big guys going at it and one of the big guys decides to dodge, that is I don't know if I should say objectively bad, but like do honestly tell me if you find that as entertaining as any other style of sumo. In short, the henka is bad because it is boring.
Yeah,
In all but like the most David versus Goliath circumstances.
but I can understand the question if it's phrased as, why do people hate on the henka considering the fact that it is perfectly legal? That's sort of one of those things where sumo is unlike a lot of American sports, and really a lot of sports across the world, actually, because they don't just change the rules regularly. I mean, if you're watching Major League Baseball, they are making humongous changes to the sports all the time, especially lately. Same thing in football. They make new rules every couple of weeks, pretty much, it feels like. But sumo isn't like that because the sport is so simplistic. That's been one of the kind of sacred things about the sport is keeping the rules the way they've been this whole time. So, and I think that's helpful in sports because you can compare the performances of someone today to the performances of someone 300 years ago because the sport is the same. Um, so making changes to the rules, I understand why you wouldn't want to do that. Therefore, if the henka is allowed by the rules, I think it's very hard to just tell someone they shouldn't do it if it's allowing them to win. And that's obviously why you defended Taka Keisho's use of the henka back in 2022, and I defended as well. And honestly, I was happy for Taka Keisho to win that tournament. I thought it was great for him in his career. But if you want to have a really big problem with it, I almost feel like the problem is then with the JSA for allowing it to be a part of the sport. I don't really begrudge any competitor for doing something perfectly within the rules to get a competitive advantage. It's so hard to compete at these top levels, and you have to use every advantage afforded to you. So I think it's one of those things like I get why people hate it. I personally would be disappointed to see it in, the climactic moments in a tournament, but I can't hate it too much for as long as it's within the rules. And I don't think the rules are going to be changing anytime soon, if ever. So that's the way it is, root
Not
against the
every
henka.
not everything that's bad needs to be regulated out of the sport. But just because it doesn't need to be illegal doesn't mean that I have to cheer when it happens. Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao dodging punches rather than, taking them. That's not something that needs to be regulated out of the sport. But I am well within my right to boo that, and I will boo most times that I see a henka involving two wrestlers of the same size, especially if a larger wrestler henkas a smaller wrestler.
Yeah, simply put, I think the hate it gets is probably about proportionate.
Yep. All right, and we have one last set of questions from Biso. In your Basho reviews and previews, can you cover more Rikishis instead of just the main ones on the Basho? In this case,
Yes.
the focus was on Onosato, Takayasu, Tamawashi, Onishiki, and Shishi. Listen, Okay, one we can. Two, the reason we don't is because we don't know all of them all the time. There are 42 guys in the Makuuchi division, about four or five of whom, rotate out every single tournament, all right? We can't always keep track of every single one of them. Not to mention, we do sort of have time limits on how much time we can spend, doing a single episode. Listen, if you wanted us to go down all 15 days that Nishiki Fuji had, his first match before withdrawing from the entire tournament, we could go through Asakoryu's whole 15 days, win, loss, win, loss, win, win, loss, 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 loss. We totally could. But then these episodes would be way too short and you'd probably stop listening halfway through or
Yeah,
something like that.
I think it's definitely something we've talked about in the past, how long we want to make the shows, and I think we're still trying to figure out that sweet spot of what people want the most. I'm definitely happy to workshop maybe an hour-long episode or two just to kind of see if that's what people are interested in. I think maybe we can afford the time for that. It's double the editing work, but certainly something that we could consider. But fundamentally, we've just made the creative decision to focus on maybe what we consider the biggest storylines in each basho, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't talk about a little bit more. And maybe there's room for a little bit more of the side quests in each tournament that we could talk about, not just the Yusho winners and who they were directly competing with for the whole tournament. So absolutely something we could do more. And hey, maybe we can extend the length of some of our upcoming previews and reviews and see what you guys think.
Yeah, I mean we are still a growing show. We've only been doing this for, a little over a year. We're not, like we're not Joe Rogan, all right? We haven't been doing this for like 10 years, 2000 episodes where, nobody can tell us how to run our show, all right? If you guys have, advice for us, we'll think about it and see how we can give you the people what you want.
And speaking of advice, the next question that came from that same user is one that we're
Ah,
taking
yeah.
very seriously.
Yes, see this one exactly. Can you release your episodes to Spotify as well? Fortunately for you, tell them about it.
So, as of this episode, assuming everything goes to plan, this will be our first episode that is releasing live on Spotify. We saw a couple comments about this in the past that people were looking to be able to kind of listen on the go using Spotify, and we're going to do it. So, if everything goes according to plan, this episode should be available. You can find us on Spotify. If you aren't already listening from there, you can go search us, New to Sumo Podcast. Same logo, same name, same everything. Might have some of our old episodes on there as well, if that works properly. And this one should be our first ever released on Spotify. So that's really exciting for us. And thank you guys for making it possible.
And one final question. Any chance you can release your sumo song separately? Oh, you mean this song?
New to Sumo Podcast Fun.
Absolutely. And, I'll say one thing about that song right off the bat, in case it's not obvious to people. That song was made using AI, of course. I hope that doesn't bother people too much. It's just, we have very, very limited resources. We just do things for fun. We hope it's fun for you guys. So that song, yeah, it was made by my wife, actually, who put it together using an AI program. And we had some ideas of just posting a video of the song. If people like it so much, we'll make that happen very soon.
Yeah, so you can look forward to hearing us on Spotify. You can maybe somewhere in the distant future listen to our sumo intro, outro in a separate video. But beyond that, the future of sumo itself looking pretty bright, and as is the future of our New to Sumo podcast, thanks to all of you.
Yeah, we really appreciate you guys again getting involved. The comments, they mean so much to us that you guys are just contributing and talking with us. We've gotten some emails now. If you haven't already reached out and you're interested in it, new to sumo podcast at gmail.com. It's also listed on the channel page, and you can get in touch with us in other ways. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and any more questions that come along the way, we can try to answer them as we go. But really appreciate you guys sending them in and supporting the channel. We can't wait to do this more.
Thank you guys so much for being here for our first, but hopefully not last community mailbag. We'll see about what it'll take for us to get another one of these out.
Yeah, and for that theme song that everyone loves so much, let's hear it. Take it away.
Join the ranks, let's start the show. New to sumo, here we go. Bouts and shouts, your weekly treat. Every champion you'll meet. Ring the gong, it's time to learn. Sumo tales at every turn. New to sumo podcast fun.